Well, welcome, Aviva. And we're so glad you are joining us to answer some questions about this absolutely brilliant film, documentary, Rosenwald, and a man who did so much. And sometimes when I share this with people are like, wait, who is this? It seems familiar. How is it that such one individual while being surrounded, but made such a huge impact in so many lives? How is this not a bigger, or how is he not more well known to everybody in every
Yeah.
community?
Well, my MO is to make films about underknown Jewish heroes. And about 17 years ago, this is how I would have introduced the film, but I had a shiva to go to before tonight's talk. I was at a talk that was advertised on Martha's Vineyard at the Hebrew Center about Blacks and Jews. And because it was Rabbi David Saperstein, who I know, was the head at that time of the Action Center, the Reform Movement office here, and the SNCC creator and great civil rights leader, Julian Bond, I was sure they were talking about the 60s. And I go and I sit down, and all of a sudden, Julian starts talking about Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald Fund, because his father and his uncle had been funded. And I thought, oh my gosh, it was just like a light bulb went off in my head. I had grown up in Detroit. I had gone to integrated schools, just the whole issue of civil rights. My dad was involved in the poverty program, and I always wanted to make a film that would represent that. Now, I didn't know I was going to do it about 100 years ago. And I'm just so glad that I heard Julian speak that night. And what was also great is I became really good friends with Julian and his wife. And unfortunately, he died just as the film was coming out, but we did do some programs together, and he was very happy the way it was. And what's fascinating to me is, just like a talk can inspire me, that for Rosenwald, it was reading Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. It only shows you how important those slavery testimonies were, and also being inspired by his rabbi. I mean, Emil Hirsch is a fascinating character for me. He's originally from Luxembourg. I mean, I think you could do a whole film on him. He was on his football team at the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, I do baseball movies, but imagine a future rabbi being in the football team. And I just want to show people right off that you could buy your own copy of the film. It's a DVD, but on this package, there's a second disc of 4.5 more hours.
Wow.
Of bonus features, all the things that we couldn't fit in the film, including a wonderful story about a Hirsch. And let me just tell you one funny thing. So here, this is the top Reform Temple Sinai synagogue in Chicago. And he would preach. And first of all, the services were on Sunday because a lot of people were still working on Saturday. And a lot of even non-Jews would come, and he would have a suffragette talk. And he was like the original signer of the NAACP, a great liberal rabbi. And once he denounced someone in the congregation because of the way the labor conditions were in the factory, and the guy got up and walked out. But the funniest line I have in the bonus feature about Hirsch is he had this line because a lot of the young girls in the congregation were having nose jobs. And he says, you can change your noses, but you can't change your Moses, which I don't know if any rabbi would have the audacity to say it now.
Right.
Another thing that I find really fascinating, if I could just outline some of the things that I always like to talk about, and then we can do questions, is, it started with 5 schools, and it just, and obviously Booker T was very smart. He knew that the college was really good, but the high schools or the even lower grades were. And then this incredible experiment. You go from 5 to 5,000. It's just amazing. And I think one of the best things that Booker T did was, Julius Rosenwald was being generous. He says, we're building these kid houses, and you can still hear or read about kid houses being sold. There was just something in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about a Sears kid house that had been expanded on. But Booker T said, no, we're not going to take them. We're going to build them here. And just this whole sense of we're going to do them here and, teach the students. And Robert Taylor, who was the architect, is, if you remember Valerie Jarrett, she was second in command with the Obamas, is her great-great-grandfather. And actually, Barbara Bowman, who's in the film talking about the Michigan Garden Apartments,
Yeah.
that's Valerie's mother. In any event, there also were green architecture way before we were talking about green architecture. The way the windows were shaped. And what's really great is how the National Trust for Historical Preservation has preserved them. And if you go around the South, you can see great restorations. And then there's a whole movement now, inspired by the movie, to develop a park in Rosenwald's name. And I think it's called the Rosenwald Park, and you can look that up. As a matter of fact, there's never been a park named after someone Jewish, but more importantly, I think obviously what he did really makes a difference. And when you think of the alumni, I mean, everyone from Representative Lewis, and if you watch MSNBC in the morning, Eugene Robinson, and one of the great play directors, George Wolfe, he just recently had Myrena, went there. And the pride, I mean, I have even a bonus feature just on him, the pride of what it meant to go to those schools. And it's just marvelous. As a matter of fact, I think it should be a real role model. And you can see with both the way George Wolfe talks, but Maya Angelou, who, by the way, Maya Angelou and Elsie Davis, I did not film. There was a great series called Eyes on the Prize that was made many years ago. Henry Hampton produced it, and I was able to obtain interviews from there. But everything else I filmed. The things that are really dear to my heart, I'm the daughter of an artist. You can see my mother's work right behind me.
I was noticing that beautiful painting.
Yeah, it's her self-portrait. Is how he helped so many artisans. I mean, someone like Gordon Parks, who, again, in the bonus feature, we have a story that when his first camera, he wasn't, real tuned on how to use it, and actually fell in the water. And, and it was tough because when he first went out to shoot, DC, I live in Washington, DC, was such a biased city that he couldn't even go everywhere to shoot what he wanted to do. But for me, the best story, the worst story and best story is Augusta Savage, who on one hand had this scholarship to go to Paris until they found out she was African-American. They stopped it. Then she developed this great career. She's the teacher of a lot of the Harlem Renaissance artists. But by the way, there was also Chicago Renaissance. And she did this great piece for the world, what do you call it? She did the great
World's Fair?
Yeah, World's Fair. I actually have a little model of it. And she did not
They did say that was destroyed, right? She couldn't.
She did not have the money to bring it back, to her place. So it was destroyed. So I've written an essay in the New York Times, and the National Trust did a feasibility study paid for the Ford Foundation. So I'm hoping that one day, very soon, they'll reestablish it. My dream would be down in Florida, where she was born, maybe the Obama Library, and back in front of maybe the museum, the African American Museum here, and where it originally was in Queens. I hope you all have had a chance to either go to MoMA or the Phillips, because the Jacob Lawrence Migration Series, which the Rosenwald Fund supported, was split in half, odd even. I'm not sure exactly what he wanted, but it's one of Rosenwald's daughter that bought it at MoMA, and then Phillips had the foresight to buy it here. There's now great restorations going on. It's a little bit in the end of the film, but there's a bonus feature about how the Michigan Garden Apartments are now the Rosenwald Courts, and it really is quite wonderful because when you go in them in Chicago, there's a poster of the film. And it just goes on in terms of what a difference either who he supported or what a difference it made. I think there's also some unsung heroes in all of this, besides, of course, Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington. One is, for me, the importance of the sleeping car porters, the fact that they would bring the message from the South and these from the North to the South, and they're risking their own lives of telling them, come north, this is what can happen. And the importance of the Great Migration, which also Rosenwald helped with in terms of giving money to wives so it could house people. And the Michigan Garden Apartments was because it was so crowded. So then you have to go with footage. Now, for me, it's as important to have footage, so actually documentary footage, but also feature footage. So when the story was, I'm talking about Rosenwald's father being, a peddler, I was able to use Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. Which,
I noticed her.
And I remember there was one episode where it was Christmas, the Jewish guy selling at Christmas. But the one I'm most proud of, and I just wish my father influenced me so much in terms of what films I made, especially Hank Greenberg, but he never lived to see any of my films. But we're able to use a little scene from Rawhide with Clint Eastwood in it, speaking Yiddish, is like the cat's meow.
Yeah.
But in terms of footage, it's not just filmmakers who made it or using feature footage. Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the mentor to Thurgood Marshall in the civil rights case, the two of them went around and filmed the schools, trying to show they were separate and not equal. So that's why we got some of the most beautiful footage, and the kids are really happy, because the filmmakers, are fellow African Americans, and the kind of stand that Rosenwald took back in Chicago over The Birth of the Nation, which has to be the most insidious racist movie, which President Wilson showed and complimented in the White House, and Rosenwald and the mayor of Chicago tried very hard to prevent it. It just shows you that it's, there was also a risk that Rosenwald took, because I don't know if you all know, and it's in the bonus feature in the DVD second disc, but the story of Leo Frank, who was a Northerner who had married into a Southern family in Atlanta, was running a factory, was mistakenly accused of raping one of the young girls there. And while he was being held, and actually Rosenwald and others were, including the owners of the New York Times, were paying for his legal defense, was taken out and lynched. And that really scared a lot of people. And even though Rosenwald wasn't living in the South, he was there frequently. So, people could have been very worried, but they, just kept on doing what they wanted to do. And I think it's a great role model for funding. And then during the war, or Rosenwald already had died, but his children rescued 300 members of their family from Germany. You see that every summer Rosenwald would go to Germany. And I always say that actually those trips really influenced him, because one was his kid loved the Science Museum in Germany. He came back and built one. So, and then the Michigan Garden Apartments was partly influenced by an apartment building he saw there. So he was always thinking how he could give back. And one thing that's really sad this week, I don't know how many of you who are listening in today read the New York Times, but Sears is about to go bankrupt, and they're talking about all these buildings that are about to be sold that were Sears buildings, and how they were specially selected. And every week we put out a notice, and if you write into the Ciesla Foundation, we can put you on the list. And I'm making a remark, a mark with a news article saying, Julius Rosenwald would not have let these, Sears A collapse, but B sell the buildings like that. But 125 years later, things change.
True. Well, that is true. One question that we did have, which was interesting, because this was, you saw the Ku Klux Klan walking, and there was the churches. And so one question that initially been asked is, were there any fires? Were the schools burnt down?
Well, we have that one story. We have that one student who talks, yes. I don't know how it happened, maybe because oftentimes it was land donated by Blacks, so there were more in Black neighborhoods and they protected it. Um, but somehow there weren't as many stories as you would have think would have happened. The irony is that, or is that the Black community really was paying twice for their education. On one hand, they paid in taxes, so that was that. And for some reason, North Carolina especially had the most schools, but also they were the ones in the community that raised the money to build them. They would have these, food sales, they would have auctions, whatever they could. So, education was still something that was allowed. And I guess one of the big reasons, if they weren't integrated, maybe they weren't as threatened. I don't know.
Mm.
But there was that one Mississippi story.
Right. But it was interesting how in the movie it did say that when they went to go rebuild it, they almost did it secretly so that no one would know. And then all of a sudden it was there and they
Yeah.
done deal. I think it, in one case they had to build it twice before they finally said that it.
Because I really did look for evidence of that, or newspaper articles at least, and certainly the governor of was it Georgia, Talmadge, called Rosenwald out. So it wasn't as if it wasn't gone unmarked. But I love the story of where one of the older men who was a student saying, and I'd look up and I'd say, who's that white guy on the wall? They couldn't quite figure it out. But it is nice to see, see Lincoln and Rosenwald and Booker T.
Yeah. I do see, I think Kathy Walker has a question. Would that be correct, Kathy? Or no? You could shake your head.
Any Rosenwald school relatives in the audience?
I don't know. I know one of our board members dated one of the relatives or the great granddaughter of the Rosenwald.
Oh, which one?
I wish I remembered. I just remember the story of that. It was interesting, and that you actually had footage of him speaking as well. And I would love to get that quote about, there's that perception that some people think that rich means smart, but there's ample proof to the contrary.
Good luck, right. I got a big laugh, especially when a certain person was president at the time. In that particular line. That, another reason he's really not known as much, and because it's 100 years ago, a lot he operated in the South. Of course, he's known much more in the Black community, is his modesty. He really did not want to call attention to himself. To him, who was getting the charity, the tzedakah, that's what was important, which I think makes him even more interesting and more, someone that a lot of us can emulate. I've had people walk out saying, I want to grow up to be Rosenwald. So, my joke is, not all of you can give me $1 million for, there's several new films I have, but there's a little Rosenwald in all of us.
Well, it was, and his philosophy of, I will give you 30%, and the Black community will do 30%, and the white community 30%. And that could be a good business model for raising money for your films.
Well, people give me money and then I have to match it. So it does happen.
Yeah. And so in terms of, finding the heroes, the unsung heroes, was there anything when you were making this that surprised you or that it was so unexpected?
I think the breadth of the work, I thought I was just making a film about the schools. I had no idea when I first went into it, because, the big line was Rosenwald schools. He built these schools, is the breadth of support for the most incredible who's who in terms of African-American literature, art, singing. I mean, Marian Anderson is it was just wonderful to develop those materials. And, as much as I knew about Eleanor Roosevelt, I didn't know that they had an involvement. I didn't think I'd have any World War II in this, because usually my films start later, and there it is, the Tuskegee airfield, and that they supported the money, So it turned out to be a much richer and funner project for me that way. But that's why I had to do the DVD with the bonus features, because there's just so many stories to tell.
Here's a question. Why did Rosenwald want his fund to end, whether 1948, 1958, whichever year specifically they
He
mentioned?
just felt that every generation has something else to give, and that he just wanted, it's a theory of spending down, that he wanted the fund to end. I'm happy that the Ford family didn't think that, because the Ford Foundation was very generous in terms of giving money for the study guide. We also have a downloadable study guide that goes with the bonus features. So it's just something that you often find practice in philanthropy, and he's one of the role models for it.
And I know that, we had it in the newspaper, Rosenwald, but what is the full name of it? Because I know you have the DVD right there.
It's Rosenwald.
Oh, what is, I thought there was another description. Maybe that was just the
Well,
description.
that's just the tagline, the remarkable story of a Jewish partnership with African American communities. But no, this is the one film with one word.
One film, one word. And the most brilliant part, and when we'd be talking to people in advance of this, is it was that partnership. It wasn't just going down and doing something, but it was a real partnership and collaboration. Right. Which in Dutchess County, we believe very strongly in partnerships. Tonight is a partnership and collaboration in addition with the Poughkeepsie Public Library, the Dutchess County African American Clergy Association, really trying to build understanding and supporting each other and building community. So I thought that was a kind of, I don't know if that was just his business model in general, or just his philosophy of how to achieve success.
I think it was his philosophy. I also think he stole Emory away from the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was his way of saying, hey, this is what I want to do in terms of building up. It wasn't always about, even with the whys, that, if I put out a third, then the others will to give. It was, you partnership in money and partnership on what the program should be. And some of these applications, by the way, some whites also got Rosenwald grants. I think you hear Woody Guthrie,
yeah,
who apparently in one of the applications, one of them for Woody Guthrie recommendation said, I'm not sure what I'll do with it, but just give him the money. So, but it turns out, look, there was also abundance of great minds there, but the word got out, they applied for it, and they did very well in terms of both the selections and the projects.
Yeah, Marian Anderson, her ability to go over to Germany, and then while she was rejected, to come back and sing on the Mall to that tremendous audience, must have been very powerful for all those who were there for that.
The AR building will always have that as part of the second sentence when you describe it, the place that wouldn't let Marian Anderson sing. They were not very, it didn't look into the future how horrendous that was going to be. Mm. And the story of her finally singing, right there in the Lincoln Memorial, you just can't beat that.
Yeah. And as a film director, it must be an interesting process, because as you said, you have a whole other DVD with extras, deciding which would tell the best story. Do you have a rhyme or reason, or how do you figure out how to tell the story?
Well, partly it's how many minutes people can sit with their tushes in the seat. Look, it could have been a 4-hour film, and I just decided it has so much educational value that so many, some of the things were mentioned in the film shorter, but there was still some, richness, like the George Wolfe, Leo Frank, I just didn't address, but I decided to put in the bonus features. More on the rescue of the family members. It wasn't in the film, but it's a note at the end of the film.
There was a picture, yeah.
Yeah. It's those hard choices you can make. But I think educationally, people are really benefiting from it. And then the study guide goes with, for teachers, that goes with all the bonus features.
What age group would you say this would be targeted to? Is it more middle
Junior high,
school?
high school, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was definitely a lesson learned for many of us. As you said, I didn't, I was like, oh, the schools. And as you said, that fund just has such a great impact on so many. Definitely an interesting component. I know we're a little bit later than we normally are. Are there any questions that are still up? Yes, there is. Okay. Someone said, asking about, you mentioned a newsletter. Is there an internet address or a website, and
Right.
how can they get the DVD?
Okay.
So,
If you go to rosenwaldfilm.org, you can order the DVD.
okay, let me just type that in, rosenwaldfilm.org.
I believe. I hope that's right. Do I have the thing in front of me?
Well, we could do a Google search, and I think,
I'm sure that's right.
oh, there,
And
Bradley
in
did the
terms-
search. There you go. So it's in the
And in
chat. I'm
terms-
sorry, it's in the chat, rosenwaldfilm.org for everybody. Go ahead, Viva.
And in terms of asking to get our Friday newsletters, now, let me tell you, I'm also just finished co-directing and co-producing a film on Native American mascotting, the fight against mascotting. So there's a lot of Native American things there. And then because I had done the Hank Greenberg and Mo Berg, there's a lot about Jewish athletes. I also started a website called Sports Equality for Women, about stories about women. And that you can go to that website. And then I am now working on 2 new films, one called Ben Hecht, who was incredible writer, a very successful screenwriter, who did everything from Front Page to Notorious to Wuthering Heights. And then when he realized how many Jews were already being murdered, when he read that 2 million had been murdered, he started completely working on saving European Jewry and trying to get then Jews to Palestine. I'm working on that. And then the other film is called Pissed Off. And it's about women fighting. When they built the Congress, they never thought women would be in the House or the Senate. They never built bathrooms. So there was the fight for potty parity. So it's a short I'm making. And so if you go to Ciesla, it's Ciesla Foundation.org. That's named after my grandparents who perished in Auschwitz. That was the family name. You can find about all these different films. You can ask to get our Friday newsletters. You can send end of the year contributions. And the other thing that I'm about to work on, but I haven't put it up on the website yet, is the family story about my mother and my uncle's survival stories during the war and then coming to America. And I'm calling that Picking Up the Pieces. So I just decided that I never heard the stories, and I'm the one in the family that's the filmmaker, and there's great visuals because I was born in Berlin actually 75 years ago next week.
Oh, happy almost birthday.
But that's the new 50, right? And
Yeah.
my father-in-law was in my father was in the military government. So we didn't live in a DP camp, but he wrote stories about them. So I have hundreds of photos. So I'm going to use that too, in terms of the whole story of what Berlin was like after the war. And then, of course, my uncle's story, and they came to America and had very great success stories.
That's when did your family move to this country?
My uncle came a little earlier, I think 47, and my mother and I and my dad went to Detroit in 49.
Well, well, we look forward. I mean, not that that'll be around the corner, but we definitely look forward to that. We can make it a hat trick, a trifecta. You can come back again for yet another
Hopefully
movie.
we'll be. I was supposed to be in Israel today, as you know. I originally said no because I was going to start filming on Hacked, and then look at family photos there. So let's just pray that no one else gets sick and we can get rid of this pandemic. Everyone get vaxxed because, Israel closed the doors, as I understand they had to do, but it ruined my trips. I do have to say one thing, that I live in the District of Columbia. So if I had done my intro, if I didn't have to go to Shiva, I would have said I dedicate the film to statehood for the District of Columbia and voting rights. I always do that ahead so I can do it at the end. So we don't have anyone that's listening in who had family, mishpacha, that went to a Rosenwald school or grew up in Chicago. I always got either Chicago or Southern story.
None that I see in the chat, but probably after the fact, people will be like, "Oh, I should have mentioned that." So,
well, sometimes they don't even know, and then they go home and said, "Oh, I saw this movie," and
right,
right.
It
brings up. Where is Poughkeepsie exactly located?
If you go north of New York City, 75 miles.
Oh, that's all. Okay.
Yeah, it's a train ride away. Okay, we have one short question, I assume, from Jonah Ritter. So, Jonah?
Every time I'm introduced, it's always prefaced with short. Aviva, you are just a wonderful human being, and it's been a delight to hear you. And it's your storytelling qualities are so intriguing, and notice with documentary filmmakers, they just so well know how to tell a story. I'm wondering, though, the question is about distribution with the internet, with other ways in which content can be delivered. Do you think that now is a better time to be a documentary filmmaker, a harder time to be a documentary filmmaker? Do you think that like Magellan, I don't know if you're familiar with that subscription, but there's various ways to list product like yours. So
okay,
do you think
so
this is a better time to be a documentary filmmaker?
Yeah. I'm very traditional, and I always want people to see movies in the movie theaters. Obviously, that's not as true anymore. And also, I think COVID has really proved that. I'm just now raising money to secure rights for Hank Greenberg. Once I do that, I will be able to, I'm hoping, get a streaming deal for all my films. I mean, to begin with, I always like to be the movie theaters, then TV, and then streaming. But I think it's a new era, and I owe it to the people who I do stories of to get them out more broadly. It's just sort of a bel egant in terms of rights, because as you see, we don't skimp on music, we don't skimp on visuals. So, I always feel that documentaries should move like dramatic films and use a lot of feature footage, which means, of course, you have to get rights and permission, and the rights have to be for enough time so that you can stream it. It's a whole new ball game now.
That would be great if someday, I was going to say someday on Netflix to be able to see.
Well, anyone have contacts on Netflix is listening in or anything else, I'd love to know. Of course, that means that you don't have these kind of screenings, unless, of course, you want me to talk with it. But,
when there's a will, there's a way.
yeah.
And we did have one last question. Was Hall Johnson, the musician arranger of the Black Spirituals, a grant recipient?
No. Oh, yes. Weldon Johnson. Yes. Actually, would you wait 1 second? I forgot to bring something to show a prop.
Yeah, you did the props. So when she comes back,
yes, and it was his song, Lift Up Every Voice and Sing. And this is Augustus Savage's model of it. And this is what we hopefully recreate. I bought this at an auction on Swan because I'm so crazy about this piece. And as a daughter of an artist, I just can't imagine that she couldn't bring it home. So it reminds me, I think I know exactly how to approach now to get it going again.
Well, you're happy to have inspired you then.
Well, it's only because I also heard about someone whose father's in this film that now works at a foundation that I think can support it. So I sort of maybe have an end to the foundation.
Terrific. Well, you'll have to keep us in the loop to
You know, it's
to know
interesting
news.
because we're talking so much of taking down statues. And
Mm,
I can understand, you know, especially for people's racist past, this is like completely opposite, that we should restore it because it has such a, you know, wonderful history and symbolizes so much. And she did, you know, and also because she's a female artist, I think I feel a real affinity for her.
understandably so, from one female artist to another. So we thank you for joining us. We're sorry for your loss for the Shiva
And that's a
earlier.
dear friend's mother, who's actually was an artist and a philanthropist in her own right.
Oh, nice. And hopefully everybody who is listening will find a way to do their own impact, their own tikkun olam, repairing the world. Those are our values at the Federation. Tikkun olam, mitzvah tikkun olam and gemilut chasadim, of just doing good deeds, repairing the world, and doing acts of love and kindness. So we thank you for joining us tonight.